Good evening. Welcome to Testimony Time for June 2021. Sorry we've missed a couple of months, but we're back tonight, and I think we've got a really good treat for you tonight. We've got Julie Chester with us this evening. So thank you, Julie, for coming. So we're going to spend some time exploring and learning more about Julie and her story. And then we're going to, just see where this takes us. So, thanks for coming.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, we've been trying to persuade you to do this for a while. So it's great that we finally got you. And you aren't chained to any chair, are you? You are here freely of your own.
I am here of my own will.
Oh, well, yeah, good. So that's good. So, the general pattern we've done with these, as we've tried to find out a little bit about where you grew up and about your childhood and all that kind of stuff, and then we'll explore maybe a bit about your faith journey and all of that kind of stuff as well. So we'll just see where this goes rather. So let's start right at the beginning then. So where were you born? Where was that?
That's a good question, actually, Tiz, because for many, many years I thought I was born in Twyford. My mum said that I was born in a little nursing home in Twyford, and has told me a lot about my birth and about everything else. And then a few years ago, when I needed to get a copy of my birth certificate, I phoned up the records place and they couldn't find me. And it turned out that's because my mum had forgotten, and I was actually born in Southampton General.
Oh, right.
It was my brother who was born in Twyford, but I argued with them at length. So I was actually born in Southampton General.
Oh, okay.
And my parents lived in Chandlersford at the time.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
Okay. So, Chandlersford. My grandparents lived in Chandlersford, so it's a nice place. So but I know you didn't spend all of your childhood in Chandlersford, did you?
No.
So tell us about where else you've lived and how that all kind of happened.
Yeah, so we lived in Chandlersford. I'm not sure exactly till what age. My brother was born when I was 3. That's my earliest memory, is of bringing him home from hospital and not being very impressed. And that was back to Chandlersford. And then I'm not sure exactly what year, but we moved to Cyprus because my dad's job, although he was a customs officer, he, for some reason, worked alongside the army and the RAF as well. So he, out of quite a lot of applicants, kind of won this or got this job to work in Cyprus. So we moved to Limassol, and he worked at Akrotiri, on the army base. And we were there until, this is going to show how old I am now, 1974, when the war happened, and then they made us come back. Well, they made the women and children come back. Okay. My dad came back later.
So for some of us, there may be people listening going, I don't remember a war in 1974. So can you tell us a little bit about that, what your memories are of that?
Yeah,
or what that was?
It was really exciting, was my memory of it. I'm sure it wasn't exciting for any adults who were around. I think for me and my brother, I would have been 9, probably coming up 10, and it just meant for us that I think we noticed that adults were starting to get more tense about things.
Right.
And then I just remember our house was kind of not on an army base; it was just in the middle of a village, and I remember having to sleep on the kitchen floor because there was gunfire outside a little house, in some empty houses that were being built nearby. And then the Red Cross car came and took all of us up to the army base, and we stayed in a house with, I seem to remember, 8 families, so lots of children on the army base. They opened up the cinema, which I remember that really well, that you could go to the cinema free, like all the children.
Wow.
We had a great time, a lot of kids sleeping together on the floor in a big house. And then we were flown out quite quickly back to England in an army plane, which I have this memory of it not having any seats, that we were actually sort of sat against the wall. But whether that's true or not, I don't know. But yeah, it was sad because it felt like home.
Okay. So that was, was that the wall that in Cyprus between the Greek Cypriots and the Turkish
Yeah.
Cypriots?
And then the island was split after that. So
And it is still, I think, split, isn't it?
yeah, to some degree.
Wow. Yeah, so, okay. So you came back then, back to the UK in 74. So where did you live then? Where did you kind of
So we
set up
came back to Chandler's Ford, the same house that my parents must have rented out while we were
Right.
away. And so, yeah, then I grew up from then, sort of through secondary school, went to Thorndon in Chandler's Ford. Went to Barton Peveril for a little while, and then moved away.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you are, a local girl in that sense from around here. And I think both your daughters went to Barton Peveril as well.
They did, yeah.
So keep it in the family.
Yep.
That's good. So then you said you moved away. So where did you go after that? After college? What did you
So I didn't finish college. Life was pretty, there were a lot of difficult things. And I only probably did most of the first year of college, and then I dropped out.
Right.
And I moved up to London, well, near
Okay.
London, near Richmond. Ran away to London, maybe might have been a better way of putting it, although it was planned, but planned at very short notice. Just wanting to get away from here. And then I kind of stayed up that way for a while, and then moved back down this way again.
So did you work when you were up in that Richmond
Yeah.
area, or?
Yeah, I had some interesting jobs up there, like until I found the job that I'm in now, or the area that I'm in now, I'd done all sorts, but the highlight of that time, or low light of that time, was probably I worked in a newsagent kind of sweet shop type place, and they used to get me dressed as a slush puppy and walk up and down Hounslow High Street, and it was very hot in this massive kind of slush puppy outfit. So that was one of the weirder things that I've done while I was there.
For those of you who don't know what a slush puppy is, ask Judy later. I'm sure she would be delighted to
Yeah.
tell you. Yeah. So you moved back. How old were you when you moved back down from? Roughly.
I moved back when I was about 19, no, probably 20, just turned 20, I would say.
Okay.
Um,
And did you come back for a job, or did you just?
No, to be honest with you, my life from kind of 15, 16 onwards was a bit of a mess. And I'd kind of run away. And in fact, I got married when I was 18. I missed that bit out. Not to
Oh.
Mark.
Okay.
That was part of the running away, really. And I've missed out a lot of things, actually, that maybe I should have shared. I think sort of growing up, there were loads of really good things. Cyprus was amazing. It was we were very, very lucky to have that experience, really. But there were a lot of difficult things in my life that I won't go into too much detail on. And that left me wanting to get away, but it also left me in a place of looking for worth in something, I think, looking for love and looking for... And I know since having met people who've had similar experiences to what I'd had when I was younger, people tend to either run away from men or throw themselves at men. And I was the latter. Like, I threw myself at a lot of men. And I think I was looking for love, like I said, looking for some kind of somebody to value me, maybe, but having no self-worth of my own whatsoever. So I left home and got married to a very nice man, but I still wasn't okay. And so I still threw myself at everyone and carried on doing that. And that ended the marriage in the end.
Right.
After not very long, after 18 months or so.
Right.
The person I got involved with then, or one of the people I was involved with then, introduced me to some different aspects of life, including drugs and drink, and things. So, yeah, it was a bit of a chaotic bit of life.
Right.
And then I moved back down to Southampton with the man who is the father of my son Matthew. And again, I still wasn't able to maintain any kind of relationship.
Mm-hmm.
I was very self-destructive, and if I had anything of worth, I tended to destroy it. So
Okay. So this is all in your early 20s?
no,
Late
late
teens?
teens, up until I was coming up for 21.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll probably, yeah, so then how did life begin to settle? Did life begin to settle down then, or was it, how did that?
Briefly, it looked like it was going to. I was with Matthew's dad, living with his family, but there was nothing wrong with Matthew's dad at all. He's a good man, but I wasn't in the place to commit to anything. And while I was pregnant with Matthew, we split up. And I ended up actually living back. My mum and dad had also split up by that point. And I ended up living back with my dad and my brother in Chandler's Ford again, which was kind of like almost going full circle back to what I'd run away from, in a way, just being a little bit older. So, yeah.
Okay. So then how old were you when Matthew was born?
So he was born a month after my 21st birthday.
Okay.
Yeah, very young to be doing something like that, really. And again, it was all, he was planned and unplanned, if you like. Again, wanting someone, wanting something.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, like you hear a lot of girls saying this, wanting something that belongs to them, that will love them unconditionally, and maybe partly that, I don't know, and partly just chaos.
So you were living with your dad and your brother then? So your brother was 3 years younger than you?
Yeah, and he still is.
Yes, still is.
Yeah.
Yes, it never changes that. So I guess he suddenly was an uncle when he was in his teens as well. So that
Yeah, he would have been 17, just turned 18 when Matthew was born. Yeah.
So interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so so then you're a single mum living with your dad and your brother in what is obviously the centre of your universe, Chandler's Ford. So then, what happened? What was the next sort of stage? Life?
So I guess, nothing had changed inside. I was still just as lost as I'd always been, except that I had Matthew, and so that gave me some grounding, I guess, something good. And my relationship with my brother got really a lot closer, because I think where I left home when I was 16, just coming out of 17, he was only 13, so although we were friends as kids, we didn't have an adult friendship in a way. So that was a good thing about coming back. Our relationship got much, much closer.
Okay.
Until a certain point, anyway, when he became a Christian, which kind of is going back. As a child, we were never taken to church. I don't think I ever went to church in my life. Can't even remember any weddings. And we had there wasn't spoken about being anti-Christian or anything, but just it wasn't part of what my family did. Although when I look back, I can remember things, but I'll talk about that more later. But yeah, so myself and my brother, my dad was working still, so we didn't see that much of him, which was, yeah. And me and my brother got really, really close, and it was lovely. And then he met this guy who he was friends with at college, who came to this very church, actually.
Oh, wow.
Waltham Chase Methodist Church.
Right.
And my brother was actually really, really anti-Christian at the time, or probably both of us would have been. And so he used to sort of come home and say, oh, Andy's spoken to me about, he sort of told me this, and he'd look up counter-arguments for the things that he'd said.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd help him, and it'd be like, yeah, we'll get him. We'll sort of like, this one will floor him. He won't have an answer for this. And this went on, I guess it was Mike's first or second year of college. And so he'd go off for the night, and he'd come back the next day, and he'd be like, yeah, we had this argument. And then on New Year's Eve, like 1986 into 87, he went to a New Year's Eve party at Andy's house, went armed with all his arguments of whatever the latest bit of religion they were talking about, and came back the next morning and said, you're not going to believe what's happened. I've become a Christian. And I was horrified. I was beyond devastated, because we'd been this kind of duo, and it brought us together, this kind of like arguing about, like trying to knock somebody else's faith down, I think. So, it was just, I can still remember the shock. It was just awful. And so then I took on this kind of, this role in a way of doing the same thing that Mike had done to Andy, of trying to knock his faith and thinking this isn't going to last. He'll, it's just a phase, and if I argue with him enough, I'll argue him out of it. And so that went on for several months, and he tried to sort of talk to me about God, and I wouldn't have it at all. I used to be horrible to him, kind of shoot him down, always be sort of thinking of things that I could say to sort of try and get him back out of. I thought it was a cult at one point that he got involved in.
Yeah.
The cult of Waltham Chase Methodist Church.
Yeah, wow.
And then it got to about the April of that year, and he said to me, because he tried and tried and tried to talk to me about God and about the fact that God loved me, and I just was not having it in any way. I wouldn't even let him start a conversation. And so he said to me, I'll make a deal with you. If you'll give me 5 minutes to talk and to tell you about God, I promise you I'll never talk to you about it again. And so I thought, well, this, I can do 5 minutes. That's fine. That's nothing much. And I can't even really remember what he told me at all, because I probably wasn't listening. I was like humming in my head or whatever. But I gave him his 5 minutes, and so I said, okay, thanks for that. Thanks for nothing, kind of thing. But you made a promise, and that's where we are. And so he kept his promise, and he didn't talk to me about it again, and that's probably really hard for him, knowing the kind of man that he is. And then it got to May, and in the meantime, I was still the same person, still kind of lost and having no value in myself and desperately looking for it somewhere. And things just got lower and lower, and I think I didn't really know much about mental health then. But I was in a really black place. And so by May, I was thinking quite often, I was drinking quite a lot, and I was sort of thinking, I'm never going to find something that's going to make me feel better, so what's the point? And it all came to a head on May the 21st, 1987, when my brother got ready and he was going out to a party for the night. And I was at home, and Matthew must have been with his dad, I think. So I was at home on my own, and it was a beautiful summer evening, and I just remember Mike coming out and saying, I'm going out now, I'll see you tomorrow, I'll be back in the morning. And him going and just feeling completely lost and sad, and just sitting and thinking, because I was a real coward, I didn't like pain, but I was thinking, how can I end this? I'm never going to feel different to how I feel now. So what could I do? And just in this completely black place. And then there was just this kind of, all I can describe it as now is almost like this little tiny, tiny beam of light from heaven almost. And for some reason, I just did this kind of throwaway prayer of like, okay, God, if you're really there kind of thing, let Mike talk to me again, and I'll listen to him this time. And it was such a kind of like win-win for me, because I knew, well, God didn't exist. But also my brother had made this promise to me, and he kept this promise. And he'd gone out to a party for the night, so he wasn't even in the house.
That's a triple lock.
I know, exactly. And so I kind of sent this thought into nowhere, and then went back into the black that I was in, really. And probably within 10 minutes of that, my brother was out. I don't know if he got to the party, but he was certainly on his way. And he says that God told him to come back. Wow. And tell me that he loved me. And so the next thing I knew, I was sat on the back step in the same place, and Mike came back and sat down next to me, and he said, "You're going to hate me." He said, "I'm really sorry. I know I've made you a promise, but God's told me I have to come back and say that he loves you." And it just literally blew my mind. There was no arguing at all, and he couldn't have known. You can't rationalize any of it. And,
so those three things that made that throwaway comment, prayer to God, and then God does that, and Mike does that.
I know. And so he said, I mean, I don't know what he expected. I'm guessing he expected me to knock him back. It was quite a brave thing, because I was his big sister, and he'd made a promise, and he knew how angry I could get about stuff. So it's quite a risk for him. But when God does something, it's different. And so I said, "Okay, tell me what you told me before, because I don't remember it. Tell me again." So we actually went down. For anyone who remembers Chandlersford in those days, there was a pub called the Tabby Cat on Hiltingbury Road, and we lived just around the corner from there. So we went down to the Tabby Cat and sat on a bench outside, and Mike told me that God loved me enough that he'd die for just me, and that even though I hated myself and I thought I wasn't worth anything, I was worth everything. And I think he was expecting a knockback all the way through that. And then he said, "And if you want to accept that, you can. We can pray, and you can accept that, and you can ask God to sort of come into your life and be with you." And I was like, "Okay." And I think, again, he didn't expect it. So I became a Christian. I prayed the prayer outside, on a bench outside the Tabby Cat pub.
Wow.
And everything changed.
Wow. But why don't we pause there for a moment, and we're going to listen to a piece of music. But as we're kind of finishing that section, a couple of things for me jump out at me from what you shared. One is some of us are called to be mics to other people, to share our faith, but also honor boundaries that we created. But then you challenge that boundary in some way, and we need to listen when God nudges us. So, and it is definitely true that God loves you, and anybody watching this, God loves you. And you don't have to be sitting outside the Tabby Cat pub, which probably doesn't. I don't think it exists anymore.
It doesn't. It's flats now, I think.
But God can meet you wherever you are. So why don't we just listen to this piece of music? I'm not sure what it's going to be, actually, so I can't introduce you properly. It's a bit like my radio show. So I will, and we'll come back in a moment and find out a little bit more. Well, thanks for coming back, and I hope you enjoyed that track. I know music's a big part of Julie's life. I'm not sure we can get any Biffy in, but if we can, we will try and do that. I think the last thing we did before lockdown was that you and Mark, Julie and I, and Steve Bridge went to see Martin Joseph play at the Brooks in Southampton. So I know music's a big part of your life. So we might touch back on that in a moment.
Yeah.
So let's pick up the story if we can. So you had this amazing experience where you prayed this prayer, which seemed never to be able to work because it was triple locked, and yet somehow Mike felt God nudge him and came back, shared with you. You went to the pub, Tabby Cat, and then life changed. So was that then? So what happened after that? How long did you stay there? When did you go home? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
What was...
I think we stayed for a lot of the evening. It was May. It was a beautiful May evening. Incidentally, myself and Mark got married on the following May the 21st.
Oh wow!
It's May the 20th, and our daughter and son-in-law got married on May the 21st. It's a special date for that reason, because of the first one. But yeah, we stayed at the pub. We had some drinks and just talked, and everything changed in that moment. Well, not everything changed, but a lot of things changed in that moment. So yeah, we had drinks, and then probably when the pub closed, we went home, and my dad was home from work by then. And although our relationship has always been interesting, mine and my dad, he'd sort of found a little bit of common ground probably with me in the time running up to then, in this kind of, I remember breaking into this kind of box, this strong box that Mike had by his bed, because we were both worried he was involved in a cult.
Right, okay.
And so we knew he kept stuff, and it was full of kind of Christian tracts and things, and we were like, evidence that it's, this weird thing. And so we went home from the Tabby Cat, and my dad had got home from work, and it was a bit like a repeat of what Mike had done to me on New Year's Day. We walked in, and I said, "You're not going to believe this," and he was really shocked and not very happy about it either, I don't think. But yeah, and then, like I said, I'd never been to church in my life. I didn't know how it worked. I didn't even know if you could just go, or if you had to be invited, or you had to book a place, which nowadays you do.
You were COVID ready before COVID was the thing.
So a few weeks passed, and we did talk about things, but I think Mike was a little bit cautious of sort of not wanting to push too hard, because it was just such a kind of 180-degree turn from where I'd been. And in the end, probably about somewhere in the middle of June, he was coming to this church, which didn't have this building that it has now. It's just a little old chapel. Yeah. And one Sunday I just said to him, how does this work? Can I come to church sometime with you, or do I have to sort of wait? And I really didn't understand it at all. And so he brought me that Sunday evening to church, and the first person I met in the car park was Robin Dugdale. Right. Up in that top corner of the car park where the men's shed thing is going to be. Yeah. And he actually hugged me. It was quite bizarre, having not had anything to do with Christians before. But he sort of welcomed me, and actually the people who were there then, a lot of whom have now gone on to heaven, they all, even though I was a mess, they really parented me. Robin and Bibi parented me. Right. Ron and Brenda, who were here. Yeah. And the young people's group just closed around me and looked after me. And so I started coming here.
Well, you mentioned earlier that the 21st of May is significant because then within a year, so I'm guessing you didn't meet Mark on the 21st of May when you married him. You must have met him somewhere between the two dates. So was he part of that youth group? Was he part of that setup?
Yeah,
or where did you meet? How
I guess
did you
he
meet
was.
Mark?
I didn't. He was actually quite good friends with my brother, but I don't remember ever seeing him before I started coming here. They probably did go out together, and I probably just didn't register. Mark remembers seeing me at Southampton Ice Rink before I became a Christian, and thinking,
Okay.
who's that scary girl with a tattoo, is how he puts it. But I
Because you were
don't.
quite a good skater. I
Yeah,
didn't
that
know
was
this
that
a
was
bit
my
about
thing.
you. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that was my teenage years. Were a lot of them were misspent at Southampton Ice Rink. But yeah, so I don't remember seeing Mark here at the church in those early weeks. But then Rosemary, who you knew, Rosemary and Ian used to open up their home on a Sunday evening for a kind of after-service young people's group, because the main services here at the time were Sunday evenings. They weren't in the morning. And so we'd go around there. And I don't know if it was the first time. It might have been the first time that I went there. I can't remember. But Mark was sat in the corner, and it was night time, and he had sunglasses on. And I just remember thinking, who is that weirdo, kind of like with sunglasses on in the dark? And I don't think we spoke or anything, but then Dave Kirby and other, like all these people are like central to sort of everything with me. But they used to have a lot of barn dances at Dave's barn. And they had a barn dance, which lots of us went to, but myself and Mark were the only two single people there.
Oh, okay.
So we weren't thrown together as a couple, but we were, because obviously at a barn dance you need a partner. And it just happened that we were the two who didn't have a partner, so we were kind of thrown together. And then he gave me a lift home in his Triumph Spitfire, which he was very proud of.
Yeah.
The passenger seat wouldn't stay upright, so I was lying down completely flat on my back, thinking, is this some pulling technique that he's got or something? What is he up to? But he drove me home and was a perfect gentleman, didn't try anything. And yeah, we got talking from there, and I think it was our shared faith that kind of brought us together at that point.
Yeah.
Because it was just all so overwhelming to me, but so amazing. And so he kind of, pretty much like he is now, he's always really gone in depth with the Bible, and like he knows a lot, and so he was able to sort of explain things, and we used to just talk for hours and hours and hours. And yeah.
So you obviously had Matthew as well as very much part of your life. I would think a very central part of your life. So where did he fit in with all of this church or youth group type stuff? Was his So how did that work out?
It didn't work really very well at all. His dad was quite angry about what had happened. We hadn't been together since before Matthew was born anyway, but he still was a really regular part of his life. And Matthew used to stay there at weekends, which is how I was able to come here, because he'd be there at the weekend. And yeah, Mark's been great with Matthew right since he first knew him. But yeah, it's sort of all happened very, very quickly. And I think we actually sort of count that we first started officially going out, or whatever you want to call it, at the start of October. I think October the 8th, 1987. And we got engaged on October the 18th, 1987. So 10 days after we officially recognised that we were together. And we wanted to get married before Christmas, ideally. But people here counselled us to wait. So we waited till the following May. So we waited 7 months. But got married on that date, because that was really significant kind of date, really.
Yeah. Yeah. So you, what age were you then? Well, you probably know exactly how old you were.
So I would have been 23, I think.
Okay.
23.
Right.
And Mark was younger than me, and still is.
Still is. Yeah.
I know.
It's amazing.
Being probably why he was friends with my brother, because they're the same age, so
Okay.
they're 3 years younger. And so actually, again, the fact that Mark's family accepted me into that very, very quickly, and if I think about it now, when my children were that age, if they'd come after 10 days and said they were engaged and they were going to get married, particularly to someone who already had a child and who was a very, very young Christian and had quite a messy life up to then, I think they showed an awful lot of grace in not kind of trying to stop us doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So you're now Mrs. Chester, and so where were you living? Because I assume you weren't all living with your brother and your dad at that point then?
No, so by that point, Matthew had gone to live with his dad most of the time and was spending weekends with me.
Right.
And we moved into a little flat in central Southampton, right by Debenhams.
Yeah.
And that's the only little brief period of time that we didn't come to this church. We went to a church called Orchard Lane Evangelical, because we didn't have a reliable car at the time, and that was literally, you could see it from our flat. So so we went there for probably 18 months.
Okay. So you mean Mark had got rid of his Spitfire with the broken chair?
No, I think he might have still had it. I'm not sure at what point that went. You'd have to ask him.
Yeah, I know.
I was never as impressed as he was. He did love that car very much.
I'm slightly jealous of him having one of those. So okay, so you spent about 18 months then living in the central town, or was it?
Yeah, between there and then we moved up to Harborough Road near the old Dell.
Yeah.
Just off Bedford Place, and so we were there until 1989.
Okay.
And then we bought our first house in Swaithling.
Okay.
Because we couldn't afford. We would have liked to come out here, but we couldn't afford to buy out here.
But you were moving gradually closer to here.
Yeah, and by that point, then there were morning and evening services here, and we used to come out twice every Sunday.
Right. Okay.
And come out in the week for house group as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we did a lot of miles. So it always made sense that eventually this is where we would end up back.
Okay. And why did you feel such a pull to this place? I guess knowing Mark's parents and other people you've mentioned, I guess it was part of it. But was that it?
Well, I think it was partly. I guess my life had changed so much that this was kind of central to that, really, how people looked after me when I became a Christian, how they kind of listened and guided and everything else. So this was home, and it remains home. It would be really hard to leave this place. And I guess Mark's mum and dad living just up the road, still living in the house that he was born in. So it just always made sense. And he was working in Swanmore at the time. So it was everything was kind of here. Really.
Okay. Was Mark working the post office then? Okay. So how about your work life? How were you? Because obviously you had. So you were having Matthew at weekends. Were you able to? Did you work? What were you able to do then?
Yeah, I had several very short-term jobs, and then I worked for a couple of years painting little model cottages, the little collectors' things, when we lived over in Swaithling. And again, it was another God thing. When I was a lot younger, I used to want to be a nurse. But I seem to remember talking to a careers advisor who sort of said, well, what about when people die or something? And I was about 14 at the time, I think. And I probably thought, oh yeah, don't know if I'd like that very much. So I'd probably had up to that point more than 20 jobs in my life, because I had lots of very short term. And then we were living in Swaithling, and one day we had pet guinea pigs, and I was cleaning the guinea pigs out, and I opened the newspaper to put in the guinea pig hutch, and the advert for my job that I've only recently left was in there, and it just jumped out at me. And I wasn't looking for another job. I was quite happy doing what I was doing. But I just saw this advert, and for some reason I just thought, I have to look into this. And so I phoned up and asked to go for an informal chat, went up to what was the old Lee House psychiatric hospital in Chelmsford, back there again. And I was shown round, and I came out of it just thinking, I have to have this job. I didn't really know much about mental health or have any desire to work in that, but I just was massively drawn to the people and the place. And so I interviewed, and there were a lot of people interviewed, and I got it somehow. Yeah, and if it hadn't been for those guinea pigs, I wouldn't be doing the thing that I'm doing now. So, yeah.
So that was Lee House, and you worked there, well, until what?
Till last October. Well, I worked there for 24 years. It moved to Winchester in 2000, late 2000. So I continued, and then we moved with it, continued working there. And then after 24 years, finally, they tried quite a few times to get me to go and do my degree. And I'd said I didn't want to do it, had no interest in it at all. But then in 2014, I think, they suggested it again. And so I ended up doing an access course and then being seconded to university for 3 years, but still employed at Lee House.
Right, okay.
And then I qualified in 2018 with my degree, went back to work at Lee House, and left last October after 29 and a bit years, which is, nobody stays that long in a job, so that's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So you and Mark, at that stage with the guinea pigs, were living still in Swaveling?
Yeah.
Okay, so when did you obviously moved from Swaveling to Waltham Chase at some point? So when was that one step, or did you take another route?
No, we moved in. We had both girls while we were living in Swatheling, and then we moved in 1998 out here because we wanted to move before Daisy started school.
Right.
Because we lived right next to a primary school, but there was a lot of fighting went on, usually the parents at the gates.
Right,
It wasn't somewhere that we felt very comfortable sending the girls. So we moved out here in time for her to just finish preschool and start school in the village.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's interesting, because Julie and I moved here in 2000, and you, so I guess we just assumed you'd always kind of lived.
Yeah, no.
But you just do, don't you? You just see somebody living some. Okay. So, and you were working at Lee House, and you had Daisy and Liddy by then. So I guess Daisy was what, 4 or 5 years old.
Yeah, she was. I think so. We moved here a couple of months before her 4th birthday.
Right. Okay.
So she did 1 year of preschool here, and then went to school.
Okay. So, and interestingly, you picked up on that. So you left school and you went to Barton, if I remember from before, and then suddenly in 2018, there you are, you're leaving with a degree. So that's quite an impressive. So one would imagine you didn't get A levels.
No.
You did 1 year less, a whole year or just under a year at Barton.
I didn't get any qualifications from that. I was not. It's probably one of the things that always held me back from doing a degree or doing anything. Actually, was that lack of kind of ability, like lack of belief in my ability to do anything, and that's probably something that I've dragged forward into my Christian life. Like I do tend to doubt myself, and yeah.
So, and now, where would you, just looking back on this amazing journey you've been on, what can you begin to articulate just, going back to that sitting outside the Tabby Cat pub and having that conversation with your brother and to where you are now, like, has that experience lived up to that expectation at the beginning?
Yeah, 100%, well, and more. I mean, looking back now, so I was going to say, so when I was thinking about pieces of music, so like for in the interval, I can see back to being very, very young. I can see places where God broke through that I didn't see, and I haven't realised until even like recent years. Sometimes there's been memories that have come back of being in Cyprus and being scared. I think my kitten had got run over and I was really upset. But there were other times I can remember being worried or frightened of things and singing, I guess, songs that I heard in assembly. That's the only place I can think of that I would have heard them. But singing these Christian songs to myself as a kind of comfort kind of thing. And I'd completely forgotten that kind of until recent years. And I remember when we lived back here, our next door neighbour, they had a daughter the same age as me called Barbara. I'd love to meet her again, actually. I have tried to find her, to tell her. But I didn't realise it at the time, she was obviously a Christian, and I think she took me to some kind of group thing in a church, a Catholic church actually, in Chelmsford, which I've been back to in recent years. I've sort of met someone who goes there, and I've been back for a play that they were putting on there. And I'd completely forgotten she took me there, but I must have heard the gospel then. And I can only remember that now, and sort of like I was obviously, as always, pushing it away. My godmother, Auntie Marion, she used to be my mum's next door neighbour when I was born, and she and her husband, they were strong Christian people, went to a church, I think in Chelmsford and then in Eastleigh, and I know she used to say she prayed for me, and she didn't ever sort of really speak a lot about her faith, but I know she really, really prayed for me. And I can just see these places where God almost broke through at times. And then I just managed to sort of like cover it up and just push it away again and not go there. So I know that he's always been with me, even though I was rejecting him then. He's always carried on knocking in a way, like knocking on the door and just waiting for that moment that I was sort of talking about when I feel like there was just this tiny... I don't think it came from me, I think it came from him. He kind of opened up the possibility that I could believe, and just opened up that opportunity. And it could have been another one where I turned it down and turned away. But no, so that was up to then, and since then, I think I don't think I've ever doubted that God's there and that he loves me, because it was so going from darkness to light, or from having my back turned to turning completely around, that I can't even argue myself out of it. I can't, I do think deeply about stuff, and that most things I'd probably manage to tell myself I was just being stupid. But I can't argue with what happened then. Yeah. And I know through that time since then, so 33 years, he's always been there since. And there's no question. It's sort of, it's good.
And how about going forward? You've had this amazing... Well, I guess sometimes we don't always see the amazing things in our own lives because it's our lived lives. But, how do you see the next period of your life? You've changed jobs. I think in a family role, you may be changing family role. You may be getting a new name.
Yes, going to be grandma, hopefully soon, October. I don't know. We thought for a while, obviously, as you know, Mark tested out the idea of going into full-time ministry. And I still think, he got a certain way with that, and I'm sure there was a purpose to that and to all the other things that have happened in our lives. I still think for him, maybe that's, in one form or another, that's still where he's meant to go. And I think I've always felt that my job as his wife is to support him in whatever that is that God wants him to do. So we don't really know. But I think the thing that I've always had really, really clearly, because God did rescue me, that without a doubt there was, I think if that hadn't happened, I would kind of guess I might have been dead through one means or another, whether it was just through the risks that I was taking or just anything. And so it has been always my thing in the job that I do. It's not somewhere that you can just go in and talk about God, but I do take God into that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that wanting people to have hope and that kind of knowing that however bad things might be for somebody, that you can be rescued from that. That's what I try and carry into what I do and what I will do in the future. And maybe it's interesting, I hadn't thought until now actually, maybe one of the reasons that I work with teenagers and have done now since whatever year that was, 1991, maybe because I was that lost myself at that age. And I love working with young people. You know, I couldn't be a teacher, but working with teenagers I don't know, it's obviously what God intended me to do. So I don't know where that's going to go. I've just changed jobs, so I'm working full-time with people with eating disorders now. And just waiting to see. Mark's probably testing things more than I am at the moment to see what he should be doing next.
Mm-hmm. Well, so thank you for sharing. That's been, I know you did need a little bit of persuading to do this, but I hope that you who've listened in on our conversation have found that to be as illuminating and fascinating and helpful as I have. And we don't often in this particular church refer back to our Wesleyan roots. But John Wesley had this really interesting piece of theology, which I think the folk who grabbed hold of you and loved you and modelled that got this piece, and that is this idea that Wesley had of prevenient grace, that you, each of us, and you are loved by God unconditionally from the beginning of time, and somehow that can rescue us. And that you talked a bit about that you were you wanted to be full of something, and so you were throwing yourself into dangerous situations maybe, and nothing was satisfying you until that moment. And so, for you listening in, if that's for you, then you need to understand that you are loved and you are accepted. And not all of our testimonies are quite as I don't know, dramatic maybe as that, but they're all of value. Everybody is all of our testimonies are valued. So, and I'm sure that you and Mark, people in this place, in this circuit, this church, are praying for you, and as you become grandparents and all of that kind of stuff. So we're looking forward to that, watching you and being with you in that chapter as well. So thanks for joining us tonight. We're hoping to put another one of these out in July. So if you've got a testimony you would like to share, please do get in touch with Jordan or myself, and we'd love to hear your testimony. But we're thinking that might be the end of this series. We might do some specials if and when we get invited to record a testimony, because there's something powerful. Did you find that helpful, telling your story? Did that, or was that so terrifying you don't want to think about it anymore?
No, it was helpful. I believe there's power in kind of sharing stories with each other. And I think my message for everyone would be that it doesn't matter how messed up you are and how dirty you are and how little you think of yourself. And I did treat myself and other people really badly. It doesn't change kind of how God feels about you, and it doesn't make you any less worthy of his love. So that's always been my bottom line, knowing how bad I was as a person. There's no one who's too bad for God to save them, really.
And sometimes articulating that, sharing that story, sometimes can speak to you to reaffirm it, but also as much as to affirm it with somebody who's listening. So thank you for being brave and taking the risk. Thank you for watching, and God bless you, and we'll see you in July.